Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nadir Amour. I'm working at Sanofi in clinical operations, and I have been involved in clinical trial conduct for probably 2 decades now, and I have been involved in a number of European projects that were addressing the ability to start using electronic records for clinical research. And one of the foundational projects is the IMI EHR4CR, who kind of established also the rules for federated databases. From there, I had been moving also to other projects. We had a project run right before the COVID. We're looking at collecting data from electronic records to feed into ECRF systems. And we went into all those issues about interoperability and governance and also skill sets. That's something that we haven't deeply dived into it. I am very glad to welcome 2 of my colleagues into that space. And we start with Manos Koutalas, who is an MD working at Janssen, and he will bring us some perspective about, from a pharma perspective, how real-world data is valued, what do we do with that, what are the challenges that we are facing, but also what are the opportunities. So Manos, thank you.
First of all, thanks for the invitation. I would like to thank specifically the Greek ECRIN. And I'm so happy to say the word GreCRIN because I still remember our efforts to make it happen. And it is very important, and I will explain during my presentation how it has also affected positively all the achievements and all the efforts to what I will show you. You are not going to have a typical presentation on data-driven innovation in pharma. So we will not have this approach by the global R&D view. You will not hear enough about AI, machine learning, all the new trends whatsoever, but you will hear enough about practical approaches. We lost the presentation now, but I'm okay. I can speak by myself, and also on how we would like to proceed as a multinational company. So let's start from the basics. What is innovation? We have many different definitions, but I will not stay to that. But definitely data-driven innovation is something that we should explain to ourselves. But for me, whatever creates value through the use of data can also be mentioned as data-driven innovation. And at the end of the day, even if the presentation wants or doesn't want to comply with that, you see, no hand there. At the end of the day, it is also important to understand that for pharma companies, the application of data and the importance of data, it's not much different than the importance of them in healthcare. So it may sound a little bit peculiar in some cases because I show you many things there. And for example, I saw that we want to use and we are happy to use in preventive medicine the data. And someone could ask, why a pharma company would be interested in preventive medicine? Because the total approach is not that I create a product and I try to sell it. I create to make solutions that will create the proper environment for the patients to get the best possible treatment at the right time and with the right access. So at the end of the day, data may create the possibility of having a product in the market, but the situation today, this is not enough. And I will explain later on and connect the dots a little bit. Now, why I'm putting that slide, I'm not going to say a lot about Johnson & Johnson, but having a company which is the #1 healthcare company in the world with 138 years and focusing a lot on data, this means something. And of course, it also means that we have 60 countries and 156,000 colleagues were very much interested to see this happening. And what I mean by that, to ensure that we'll be able to make whatever is needed to give the best for our patients. So you understand that this is not a typical situation, as it is also with other big pharma companies. It is not an environment that can guarantee that the Greek patients will be preferred to take the most innovative therapies through clinical trials, that the Greek patients' data will be used effectively to make, let's say, planning decisions used in AI settings, etc., etc. So there is a lot of internal competition. And I would like to stay on that because usually we think as pharma companies, the companies that having between them competition. It's not about competition with other pharma companies. There is internal competition in the data usage and in the possibilities that are created through this usage. And what do I mean by that? I mentioned before 60 countries, only in 30 of them we used to have R&D sites. And some of them are more important, some of them are less important. But in Greece, Johnson & Johnson didn't have for the last 12 years an R&D site. And this was something that the local organization and all the colleagues of the local organization, I would say, were feeling that we should change. And in order to change that, this is not a simple thing. You must take leverage of all your centers of excellence, all the clinical expertise, but also the ability to deliver the clinical trial metrics, the clinical trial efficiencies, the clinical trial results, to have an environment that is well regulated and promotes these research initiatives. And of course, if you think that out of this huge budget for R&D, which counts only for the trials, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, it doesn't include any RWE out there. These are 2022 data. I don't have the official data to announce for 23, but for 24, we would expect something with starting from 2 in front, and you know what I mean. But at the end of the day, these huge investments, which may be the 1/3 of the total revenue of the company, are not done without specific requirements and specific, let's say, opportunities. And the availability of data is a huge opportunity. So I can proudly now announce that we have up and running a local R&D site. So we are the 31st. That's why I said more than 30. Greece is again a core country, as we say, so it's a preferred country for the clinical trials. And this all started many years ago as a process. It is something that is based mainly on randomized clinical trials, but we want definitely not lose the opportunity of RWE and specifically secondary RWE data. And why am I saying that? If today we were to choose the one out of the 30 countries, because that was the situation, guys, one out of the 30 countries which didn't have a local R&D site was chosen, then availability of data and what we discussed in the previous sessions would be a crucial factor. A crucial factor in the decision was also the decision to have a Greek ECRIN established, and I can tell you that without any exaggeration, and that showed also that the environment and how easily we have access to the data and what other organizations can stand with us, collaborate with us, give us their expertise, and provide us these huge opportunities is highly, highly appreciated. And just a comment here. If you believe that because a huge multinational company has all the internal expertise, and it has, that it is easy for a mid-sized country like Greece, or a small-sized country like Malta or Cyprus, to get a hold of that expertise so easily and allocate time from our colleagues which have the expertise when they know that the situation is not clearly a situation that will produce the best results, then I think we are over-optimistic at least. There are other countries in the EU, outside of the EU, which can be used to get the data and also benefit the local patients more. And for me, this is something that may sound very nice to discuss about what we discussed and the upward success, but we still see a lot of clouds around. And those who were here from yesterday or the day before, you know, we had a very cloudy weather, and now with a positive north wind, which usually is not positive, everything is clear. But is this the situation? Can we expect that here? And of course, I will not elaborate further on why we focus on RWE data. Even the regulators understand that they are of huge importance. And I would provide some examples that can show to you that the global R&D and the global organization may be very much entitled to purchase opportunities, but will these data derive from Greek patients? No. And why is that? Because they will be derived from patients in Italy, in Spain? No. Because all these data can be easily available from US-based patients. And this, it's a huge opportunity missed. Either if it is for lung cancer and lung cancer prevention, and those who have clinical background can understand how important that is, even if it is for PAH, pulmonary arterial hypertension, which is a rare disease and very difficult to diagnose and help the physicians to do so, even if it is for something that we haven't started to have an availability of a medication yet, like colorectal cancer. But believe me, given the current situation, it is almost impossible for someone with my position to propose to include in these projects patients from Greece. So what about Greece? Because, sorry guys, I'm Greek, I live in Greece, I strive for the Greek organization, and I cannot put on the table what about Greece, and the situation is of course similar to many other countries. We have tried a lot in EMEA level, Europe, Middle East, Africa, that is, in pharma, let's say, wording, to support a lot of EU initiatives. And we are front runners on that. Some of them are applied also in Greece. We have a very good collaboration also with some of you, but at the end of the day, are we missing some opportunities? And what is available? What about data availability? And what I say also, what about willingness to use these data? Because I understand that we have a very positive EU regulation, which may not cover everything from the beginning, but it's very positive. But how willing are the states to proceed with whatever is required? Our experience is that it's not just a regulation. It's not solving the problem. And I cannot say that I'm very much confident that we will have the prescription data availability, and I mean availability for scientific reasons. And let me make a comment here, because for us in pharma companies, and in every company, by the way, when you have the data to make decisions, then these are also important for decision-making purposes. But we are not discussing for that. We are discussing about science and scientific questions and availability of this data to answer these questions locally. So apart from the prescriptions system, We have electronic system for pre-authorizations of use of medicines, electronic patient files, which are under development, and in some cases, in some clinics, we see that they have their own initiatives. We are going to apply disease registries, and we would like to have access on the data of these registries. The data of registry offices, you cannot believe how much important information there is there, and not only for the cause of death of a person. And of course, employment details registry, and what do I mean by that? Details on how a medication or whatever we do to a patient helps him become back healthy in the environment, how much days he has to be off, what else is needed, if he's having quality of life, etc., etc., etc. So that's my perspective on the topic. And sorry for not bringing very high-end examples and discussing about how the Internet of Things will be applied in local trials. But given the situation, and given also the country situation, with all the hurdles we face as a pharma sector, with the high rebates, the high paybacks, the high clawbacks, call them as you want, it is very difficult to get sufficient only local funding to do all these innovative things. So in order to purchase this big, huge amount for the local standards of R&D budget, and of course budget which is focused on secondary RWE data, and it will be more focused in the future, we need that development to be tomorrow. And I believe if that was going to happen tomorrow, we would invest by the end of the day tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're going to have question and answer sessions. So if you have some questions, please start entering them into the Q&A using the applications. Let's move now into the second topic.
As you sit down, I'll start episode 2. I will not do a recap of episode 1 and go straight to where I was and talk about why I think we should be doing real-world evidence. This pyramid of evidence that we were all taught with has been shown this morning, but I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. I think maybe in your pyramid you didn't differentiate cohort studies from case control studies, but they are observational stuff that lies underneath systematic reviews of ACTs and ACTs, of course. Yeah. So yeah, things that are not randomizable. This is a beautiful example of jumping from an airplane. Should you use a parachute, yes or no? If you do a systematic review of the literature, you'll find there's no trial on this topic. So you shouldn't really use a parachute when you jump from an airplane if you were to follow the paradigm of evidence-based medicine. A second advantage, I don't know how much it was covered, is that the data, real-world data, is there. So it's available. It's already been recorded. It's already been collected. And this is good for people like me who are a bit impatient and want to do good stuff quickly, but also, more importantly, it enables for replication studies. It enables us to do one of those Bradford Hill criteria, which is, can we consistently observe the same finding in different data sets? This is the first time ever I did this in my life during my PhD studentship. We published a study using data from the UK, and I managed to collaborate with some colleagues from Denmark, in this case, to replicate that study within 6 months and find exactly the same results. A third point that was somewhat mentioned this morning is generalizability. This is a very, very simple study that I thought would never be published anywhere, but I convinced one of my students to write. And this is comparing the new uses of a very established medicine called alendronic acid in Denmark and in Catalonia, Spain, and then looking at their baseline characteristics when they started taking that medicine and comparing that to the eligibility criteria in the trial. The eligibility criteria in the trial would basically only match about 40 to 50% of the people who actually use the medicine. Efficacy versus effectiveness. I think one of the questions this morning was a bit cheeky because it mentioned effectiveness in the subject, and then in the different choices it was worded as efficacy, and those are two different things, and we can discuss that later. But clearly, if you have a trial where compliance is 100%, and then you give the medication in primary care and people collect 50% of the doses, you're going to have less safety issues, but also less effectiveness. Yeah. And this is one where I don't think you expanded a lot, and I want to discuss a bit more because this is the topic of my talk, safety. Safety typically is two things: the common non-worrying things, because if there's something common worrying, the medicine doesn't make it to the market, right? And the uncommon, rare, long-term, very worrying things. And I think COVID vaccines are the perfect example of that. Yeah. That is very hard to observe in a trial. However, I much believe in a trial. Trials are not the best place to observe long-term, very rare side effects, because even if you have a trial with 40,000 people, these things happen in 1 in 100,000. So you're going to see one, and maybe it will fall in the placebo arm. This is a beautiful study that we did with some colleagues that almost costed my job. The colleagues in the clinical trials units in my department and DOMS at Oxford were running a randomized controlled trial comparing two types of knee replacement devices, partial versus total knee. And the trial is what you see at the top, called TopCat. This was a beautiful surgical randomized controlled trial where they observed no difference in revision risk, revision being reoperation of the same knee, between the partial and the total knee. But you can see how the confidence interval for that is massive. Yeah, so it goes from maybe you are actually halving the risk to maybe you are multiplying it by 4. All the previous observational data had shown an increased risk of revision in people receiving a partial knee. In our study, which basically used the National Joint Registry, so this is a registry where everyone having a knee replacement in the UK is recorded and then linked to primary care and hospital data. In there, what we observed is that if you look at if you use propensity scores and all that, and then you look at everyone in the registry, you do observe a very clear increased risk of revision, which doesn't contradict the trial because the trial confidence intervals are so massive that the observational study was still within the confidence interval. But the minute you start looking at surgeons who are more experts in this new type of device, you get closer and closer to the trial. So if you look at surgeons who've done 50 of these novel surgeries, you basically nail the estimate that you observe in the trial, telling you that trials should continue to exist. They need to be there because we need to know efficacy, but real-world evidence should be used to complement them with effectiveness, because when you go to have an operation, you don't know whether you're going to be operated by this guy over here who's done 10 of those or by this other person who has done 50. Yeah. So you need to have this data as well to understand what is the actual performance of a new technology when used in your healthcare setting. Okay, hopefully I've convinced you of the value of real-world evidence to complement trials, not to replace it. Now, issues we're having with real-world evidence. I'm not going to repeat what was said this morning about confounding and all that. We do have other problems that worry me much more. One of them is that we are like 20 years behind the world of trials in terms of transparency, protocol registration, and all that. If you go and do, this is a study done by some colleagues in the Odyssey community, looking at many, many hundreds of thousands of studies in the literature. Each dot there is an estimate published in the literature from a real-world evidence observational study. You see this funny funnel kind of shape. I wonder if there's a statistician or someone in the room who wants to dare to say what's that line, the artificial line that you're not observing there. X-axis is effect size, y-axis is standard error. So the line that you don't see there is exactly the p-value of 0.05. Yeah. So there is very strong evidence of p-hacking when people are doing observational studies, with publications clustering very sadly, I would say, for someone like me, just underneath the p-value of 0.05 threshold. And this happens because people don't need to register protocols many times. They just do studies and publish whatever they think is interesting. So I'm a big advocate for these open science principles, declaring or publishing a protocol, sharing all your analytical code, sharing all your results, regardless of whether you think they're interesting or not. And I think this is how we need to move, and this is basically copying what you and many others have been doing in the world of randomized controlled trials for a lot of years, right? So it's not rocket science. Now, some colleagues, when I tell them this, they say, oh, but they have clinicaltrials.gov. We don't have a place to register our protocols. That is no longer true. I'm sorry to tell them. Now the EMA has a real-world data catalog where you can register your database, your protocol, your results, and it enables the full transparency of the whole pipeline. So do not miss out on that resource. Now, what happens when you do all that? When you publish a protocol and publish all your results, this is basically what happens, yeah? This is a study that we published in the Lancet looking at the comparative effectiveness and safety of all hypertension medicines available in the US and in a few European countries. We produced, you need to do the math, almost 8 million estimates. And interestingly enough, they don't happen to cluster under the p-value of 0.05 threshold. They happen to be all over the place, yeah? Telling you that this is the way we need to move. Now, how have we grown this community and how are we doing things in Europe? This is, I'm gonna tell you just in 2 minutes a little bit about the ECRIN project. ECRIN is a project where we wanted to create an ecosystem for colleagues around Europe who want to work together, who have data, who have interest in methods, in training, and in creating tools and infrastructure. We use the OMOP common data model. There's other common data models out there. This has been said already. The reason we chose OMOP is that it's an open source common data model that's patient-centric, tabular, extendable, bespoke for analytics, and with a relational design, so it has a lot of advantages, and it's free. So it's one to look out for. The way we do federated analytics in ECRIN, and then as you will hear later in other initiatives, is this, similar to what you've seen this morning. There is someone, a study team somewhere, who is basically writing some code, designing a study, and using some tools, sharing some analytical code with partners. Each data partner has a local database that stays local, and then an OMOP version of that database. So basically, same data in a different format. And they keep that local as well. They run the analysis, and they check the findings, make sure there's no data that shouldn't be there, and then share aggregated results back with us. We then compile the findings and produce knowledge from that. The results of ECRIN are numerous. One of the ones I'm most proud of is this massive data network of colleagues who have mapped data to the OMOP common data model, a total of 187 partners covering 150 million records from 29 European countries, you can see there. And in parallel, we created also a market of small and medium enterprises who are capable of supporting institutions to do this mapping process, which is not a very easy task. So there's a bunch of companies that have entered this cycle and are now helping with the mapping of data. Additionally, we've created the ECRIN Academy, a free online resource that you're all invited to use, where you can learn everything about OMOP, how we analyze data in OMOP, how we use federated analytics, analytical tools, methods, and so on. And we have now thousands of students all over the world. And we have created this massive catalog of metadata called the ECRIN portal, which is free upon registration with any email address, and where you can see loads of metadata from each of the partners that have mapped in the context of ECRIN. Of course, on top of that, we've published loads of papers. We've created a lot of knowledge, including many publications in high-impact journals. I'll cover a couple of these later on in my presentation. And we are doing a final study where we're calling the mega study, because we are trying to do the largest study ever done in Europe. For now, we have 30 data partners who have analyze the data, including the colleagues here in Thessaloniki, by the way. And we're looking at whether there is a shortage of certain medicines. There's a list that the European Medicines Agency produces of medicines that are very important, and they are monitoring for shortage. And we are producing data on many, many million patients and many, many data partners across Europe. So watch out for this, because I think it will be a very important study. Okay, you've heard a lot about data standardization today, and it's very obvious that this standardization is needed to comply with GDPR, with upcoming new regulation, with EHDS, and to facilitate basically international collaboration across European borders. This is clear for all Europeans, maybe not so clear for other parts of the world, but we also have, I don't know how many languages around, right? So we need to standardize data before we can collaborate. But there are additional reasons why we do this. So one of them is the opportunity that standardization brings. So when I started doing research some 15 years ago, and I wanted to do a study on, say, adherence to anti-osteoporosis medicines, I would need to talk to colleagues from all over Europe, all over the world, and they would have similar data in origin, similar information, but looking completely different. And then what we had to do was agree on the analysis, what we would do. Each of one, or maybe somebody would be writing code against each of those data formats, and we would end up with something ugly and horrible like this at the bottom, which is obviously not only ugly and horrible, but also not scalable, not very transparent, very slow, and extremely expensive. So doing a study on the adherence to a medicine 15 years ago was typically taking us 1.5 years, 2 years. And as I'll tell you later, it's taking us much less nowadays. Now, the beauty here is that once you've done that task of standardizing the data and all your data then looks the same, you can then invest in saying, well, I'm going to now invest in having a beautiful pipeline software that can do drug utilization studies, software that can do disease epidemiology, software that can do drug safety. And we don't need to write bespoke code every single time and in every single database, which is, of course, very prone to error as well. So this is one of the advantages of standardization of data. If you think from a software development perspective rather than a statistics perspective, and this is something I have to admit I've learned only recently, you then can start thinking of these different boxes of problems that you have. One is fully standardizable. So if you want to calculate an incidence rate or a treatment duration, there's maybe 10 ways you can do that. We can fully standardize that, and we can convince colleagues to develop software that can do that in this thing that I'm calling off-the-shelf studies or off-the-shelf analytics. You can also say, well, and then for drug safety, I'm going to do 3 or 4 different things. So we will need to write a little bit of bespoke code, but not a lot. And you can then create the kind of building blocks for each of these different things using the standard common data model that you are committed with. And then, of course, and this is going to tell you where I'm from if you haven't figured it out based on my accent and my name, very complex studies will continue to happen where you need to write a lot of code every single time, and you need to reinvent a lot of pieces in the puzzle. Switching quickly to the context of the regulatory real-world evidence generation, I am the Deputy Director for the Darwin EU initiative, an initiative funded by the European Medicines, where we will be doing hundreds of studies for the regulators. And in here, we are having to do a lot of these bespoke off-the-shelf studies, and we've created tools that allow us to do that. So basically, we've created software that allow the rapid generation of data on things like characterization of people with certain conditions, drug utilization studies, descriptive epidemiology, and things like that. This is all open software, analytical pipelines that can analyze almost data. And just to give you one example, which I'm very proud of, this is the first bit of software that we produced, a package called Incidence Prevalence that, guess what, calculates incidence and prevalence. And we've validated it comparing to previous studies that we had published here in the left, and also to the COVID figures that we were obtaining from national figures, where you can see a great discrepancy. This is data from Spain, a great discrepancy during the first wave where there wasn't sufficient testing in the community, and therefore you had GPs and doctors diagnosing COVID without testing. But then after September, October 2020, when we started having really good testing capacity, you see very similar figures using our package and real-world data compared to the official figures produced by the country, by the government. Okay, some couple examples. Typically, we divide real-world evidence into these 3 buckets. We do characterization, which is looking at a cohort of people and saying, what do they look like? What happened to them? We do prediction, where we try to create an algorithm to predict who is going to have certain outcome. And then the hardest of all is causal estimation. This is very hard for the reasons you've discussed before, basically because this is observational data, not randomized. Yeah. And I'm going to give you examples of clinical characterization and causal estimation. I wanted to say that I think there's plenty of opportunities for real-world evidence, not only in post-marketing safety authorization, but also in the whole pipeline of product development, going from natural history, descriptive epidemiology, defining current care, looking into trial feasibility based on the people available in the data, synthetic arm trials, pragmatic trials, trial follow-up extension during the clinical testing, and then, of course, post-marketing evaluation. So focusing on an example on characterization, this is a study we did with colleagues from three continents in the very early days of COVID-19, where we were interested to know what treatments were being used for those people who were admitted with COVID. And what you will see is the evidence that we didn't know how to treat these patients really in the very beginning of the pandemic. And you can see very heterogeneous use of pretty much anything you can imagine, like hydroxychloroquine going from 2% to 80%, steroids going from 3% to 70%. And the same is true for any medicine you want to look at. If you then look at use over time, and I think this is a striking example, you see here hydroxychloroquine, a medicine that was initially proposed as a potential repurposed medicine for the treatment of COVID, approved by the FDA under emergency authorization in March 2020. Some safety signals, including a paper we published ourselves on cardiovascular safety, particularly when combined with other medicines like azithromycin, published in April. And the use of the medicine declined very rapidly already in May. So in April already, the FDA and the EMA published some safety concerns. And in May, you can see how very few people were already using it. By the time my colleagues literally across the road in Oxford published the results from recovery, pretty much no one was using hydroxychloroquine anymore. Now, another characterization study that enters now the context of safety. This is not safety, this is just characterization. When colleagues have to do pharmacovigilance, they need to have a benchmark, and they typically are interested to know what is the background rate of these potential side effects in the general population before I give a medicine to anyone. And for COVID vaccines, this was dramatically important because of the speed of the rollout of the vaccination campaign. And we did produce data from many, many databases, as you can see here, in many, many countries on the background rates of 15, in this case, adverse events of special interest that I know for a fact because it's cited. This paper published in the BMJ was heavily used by regulators in Europe, in America, and even in Australia. And then finally, to give you an example of causal estimation or causal effect estimation, study we did on vaccine safety. Again, another of my, this is a student that I had who during the first year of her PhD had to go through a lockdown and through publishing 4 papers in the BMJ. So I think her life has been changed forever after that experience. And this is a paper looking at the comparative risk of thrombosis with thrombocytopenia with different COVID vaccines, where we had data from 5 European countries and the US. We used very advanced methods to minimize confounding, and we ended up finding what was kind of known at the time, which is that there is an increased risk or a signal list for thrombosis and thrombocytopenia with adenovirus-based vaccines. Now, there's a lot coming in the real-world evidence world. We are going to see a massive evolution of pharmacogenomics and vaccinomics. This is something that's happening in the background, but colleagues who have massive biobanks are linking the data to primary care, secondary care, cancer registries, and the UK Biobank, which is again across the road for me in Oxford, is a beautiful example of that. And I will just show you a paper because it was published last week, where we looked at defining what are the relationships between HLA genetic variations and antibody and COVID-19 vaccine response. Where you can see how we did an analysis of the HLA, identified markers that are associated with the generation of antibodies after having the vaccine, and then looked at the association between your genetic background and the risk of having an infection and a severe infection after vaccination. Yeah. So this data is proof of concept that we can start looking into variability in the immune system and how we can target vaccination for those who will respond less than others. To finish, I will talk about regulatory real-world evidence. Just first to say, and this slides I added this morning based on the conversation we were having, I'm afraid this question of whether real-world evidence can produce reliable causal inference, we can continue discussing it as an axiom, but we now have data. And the question is no longer whether we can, the question is when and how. So the FDA has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in loads of efforts to try and replicate randomized controlled trials. And they are now learning when is it that you can produce this causal estimation with good certainty, rather than wondering if you can do that at all. I really recommend reading this paper by my colleague Shirley Wong and the team at Harvard. Basically, to give you a quick teaser of that paper, the colleagues replicated 32 trials and found very good correlation between real-world evidence and trial results, and also some challenges. So some trials are very hard to replicate. Some trials are not really doable with real-world data. And to finish, just 2 minutes on Darwin EU, and we can discuss later. Every time I talk about Darwin EU, I put this disclosure up, which is a new thing for me in my career. Basically, regulators in Europe, but also in other places, need real-world evidence quickly, transparent, scalable, and reproducible. And in the case of the EMA, they wanted representatives of Europe if possible. We work in a federated manner again. So we are here in Orange, the coordination center. We get the questions from the EMA, produce the analytical code, share that code with our data partners and data permit authorities around Europe, get the results back, compile them, and share them back with the EMA. We are facing now the challenge of scalability, going from 18 studies last year to 72 this year. And we're going to be putting more than 100 studies before the Darwin initiative ends in 2027. To do this, we're doing exactly what I said earlier. We have a catalog of standard data analysis that we have agreed with the EMA, where they told us precisely how they want to do a drug utilization study, how they want to do an incidence rate, how they want to do a characterization, so that we can then produce the data in the way we have previously agreed we would do. And that allows us to do this very, very quickly. Just to give you some examples of stuff doing, prevalence of rare disease, lots of studies on that, background rates of adverse events of special interest, natural history and prognosis of many conditions, incidence and prevalence of use of medicines over time, describing indications, treatment duration, cumulative use. At the end of last year, we now have 20 partners from all over Europe, as you can see in the map, access to 130 million patient lives in Europe, and we will basically double those numbers by the end of 2025. And with that, I will mention that we are now setting up something similar for the UK, still pending funding, but you will have heard of something called Brexit. The UK is no longer part of the EU, and therefore they don't have access to Darwin. And the MHRA is very interested to have a similar system, just as many other regulatory agencies do around the world, like the FDA with Sentinel or CNOT with Canada. And I will finish there, and hopefully we can have time for discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I will invite you to sit on the table, and we're going to start some questions. Again, if there's some questions into the audience, we will check them as well. But I will start with one first questions, and we've been hearing a lot about the technicalities around the data-driven research and real-world data. I want to ask one question: patients. How do we? What is the role of the patient? How do we engage them into that journey?
Well, if I may start, and I'm looking to Nikos here, this is something that we need to do better. And we need to take advantage of all the interactions we have with patients, starting from the patients' associations level, but also discussing with the authorities on how, apart from what pharma is doing in that direction, we should prepare the general public. This means people that are not patients at the moment, but their data may be of interest on why we will proceed with whatever we discussed today. I think this is something missing. Of course, this cannot be done by one only. We need to do it together, along with the patient associations, the ministry. I strongly believe that even other organizations should have a voice on that. And this is something that we're very willing to contribute.
Yeah, but it sounds all very political, Manos, like a politician. I'm sorry to say this. So in tangible ways, what you think has to be done in order to engage patients, and I'm not talking about what a professional patient like Nikos, I'm talking about the average citizen who may become a patient. Each of us is a potential patient and knows nothing about the value of all of that in terms of a potential investment in the end in innovation that would benefit me or any other fellow citizen. So tangible things. And it's a question that I'm addressing to Manos, obviously, but to everyone else in the room. Let's hear from Manos first.
Let's be again provocative. I try to be more of a politician, as you mentioned, but the framework, and I will discuss about the pharma companies now. Okay, a pharma company can have interactions with a patient association. We cannot have interactions with individual patients, full stop. Only if they have a specific scientific request or a question, we can answer that question, but we cannot go to them proactively.
Speaking not about Johnson & Johnson, but in the industry at large. And you are so very experienced, and I am sure that you have an opinion. Do you think that the activities and the initiatives taken by the industry in the direction of engaging and empowering patients to understand the value of all of that are, number one, sufficient, and number two, understood?
I don't think that they are sufficient. Even when we are interacting with patient associations, usually this happens under a specific when we are trying to get patient feedback about a specific trial. Exactly. And sometimes we don't even do, let's be sincere, especially for trials of phase 4, which the RWE primary data. Sometimes we don't do it. And then we face the consequences because we miss valuable insights.
Danny, if you don't mind waiting a bit to give your reply, I would like to ask other friends from the industry to express their view.
Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Tina Ndachopoulou, and I'm the medical director for AbbVie Greece. So we are conducting a number of clinical trials and real-world evidence projects as a company, but we are not the only one. So we also have a trade association, which is very active in promoting the value of clinical research in various stakeholders like patients. We haven't done enough. I think that we need more exposure to bring the value to the general public, to understand that clinical trials and RWE projects are not putting the patients under the microscope or making them lab rats, but it is a value to the community, to the community at large, to all the Greek citizens. So we need to do that by bringing the value out in various publications, public talks, etc. Also, as an industry, what we have started to do is to create a platform for the patients or the people at large to be able to have access to where clinical trials are conducted and what kind of clinical trials are conducted. And especially my team, my clinical research team, has created an internet site where all our studies, all our clinical trials are listed there with the major, let's say, inclusion-exclusion criteria. So anyone who has a condition and wants to enter a clinical trial, they can find where they can go, with whom, with what investigator, and also what kind of baseline criteria they should have. But surely we should have a pulse check, I think, what patients or the public knows and what they want to know more about clinical research.
Yeah, maybe I can add one additional information on that, because we're doing the same thing, and I think most of the big pharma companies are going that direction as well. And what we have found is there is the notion of educated individuals for clinical trials, and usually they are looking at clinical trials as a potential cure options. They're not looking at clinical trials as, I want to be part of clinical trial, it's fun, it's fantastic, I'm going to make friends. And so this is not the motivations. It's really, I am not satisfied with my treatment, is there something else that I can find? And then when you get into that, it is not just about the patients, it's about anyone who is connected to that patient. It could be, you know, the son of the guy, it could be the father, it could be anyone around that individuals. Now, are the patients visiting those websites? We all have websites where trials are being published with basic criteria for patients to be, you know, to test their eligibility. Yes, they are visiting. Now, there's another questions that come up, is the expectations. Because when you get as an individual into the websites, there's a couple of steps before you get into, let's test whether you are eligible for the trial or not. As you move through those steps, you increase your expectations as a patient to be part of the study. What we are finding is those individuals who get through the process will raise their expectations to be eligible. But unfortunately, not all of them will become eligible. So we are now putting in between the patients and the investigator, someone who will call and discuss with the patients, provide answers that the patient may have, and qualify them a little bit more before they can, you know, get the confirmation. So I think we have also to manage the expectations correctly with that respect. And I will only add one word. I think the question that I asked was purposely because I think we have, as a research community, to do a better job in educating the public, not only the patients, but also the public.
So let me introduce myself. I'm Angelina Mavraki. I'm the Clinical Studies Unit Head in Sanofi in Greece. So first of all, I need to visualize the fact that I'm in agreement with what has been already said with my colleagues in the other companies that have already shared their view. However, I think that we should admit something. US is really in advance compared to Europe in terms of relationships with patients association, what they can do in order to increase awareness of patients in clinical trials. No need to discuss currently if this is actually effective in terms of participation, it's another story. However, there is something that is done differently there, and at European level we should consider. So definitely the European regulation has gaps. No.
Well, I have to disagree a little bit with you, Angelina, because, okay, yes, there is a fantastic wealth of data that is called e-prescription and that no one has access currently for research purposes. But there are some academic registries and some registries in clinics and also in medical databases, not registries, exactly, databases, that's the correct term for that we are trying to exploit. And I think that I'm many years in clinical research space, so I see that there is an explosion of collaborations between industry and academia and societies, medical societies, in working together, collecting data from those various databases and creating real-world evidence. I think this is very important. We have to embrace these first steps, but as I have to agree with Angelina that we have a lot of progress to be made in the future.
So maybe just to follow on that, so that you can also answer the question as well, is if you can share your experience in accessing all those databases and whether it was easy or not.
Okay, so I'll try to answer both. So I think patients, and we are all patients, just to be clear, at some point in our lives, and different conditions, but we will all suffer some disease. Patients need to be involved on the whole process of research, going from designing a study, designing the questionnaire that they will need to fill in, the outcomes are relevant to them. So patients need to be involved in the whole process. And from the academic perspective, I would be as harsh as studies that are proposed that need to use taxpayer money that don't involve patients from the get-go to the end shouldn't get funded. That's the way you fix this problem in the academic sector. Now, going for access to real-world data in particular, I think we have to do a lot more to explain the benefits of using the data. We are very focused, and everywhere I go, people talk about risks and how we mitigate the risks, read identification, all the risks that exist when people are using data. We discuss very little what are the benefits, right? And I think that is extremely important. And then I think we need to have patients who are very strong advocates for the use of this data, for the use of their data, because I'm pretty sure that, very recently last week, we were doing a study where some colleagues from the UK were telling me, even if you use anonymized data results, right, like in the form of CSV files, they couldn't report anything that had less than 10 patients, yeah? I can understand the reasoning for that. At the same time, that basically means I cannot do any study on rare disease in children aged 0 to 5, which is a population that's already under-researched and who I'm pretty sure if you talk to their parents and to the kids, they wouldn't mind really if you were to use the data. So I think we need to do much more to demonstrate and to advocate for the benefits of using data for the study of safety, for the study of effectiveness, for the study of long-term outcomes. We need to have patients and citizens on board. And then finally, answering now your question on how hard or easy it is to access data, I'll just clarify that all the studies I showed, I never access the data directly. It's a federated way where I share some analytical code, and some colleagues who have access to the data share results back with me. So we never access patient-level data. The only patient-level data I have access to is the data that I have in the UK. So I have some data from a UK repository of primary care records called CPRT, which is held by the national regulator, the MHRA, and that is, it has a very clear governance, and it has been working for over 20 years with very clear infrastructures. The access to data is a socio-technical construct where you need to have the technical capacity, but also the kind of social acceptance of access to data. And the legal framework is now very clear in Europe, and I think it's going to change in the future, but probably going in a very similar direction, I think, based on the talks that I heard from Kike and Christina earlier today. So I think the problem is not really a legal one, it's more a socio-technical challenge.
Yeah, I'm Salma Malik from ECRIN core team based in Paris. I would like to ask, I wonder if the real world data is interoperable. Did you ever look at it? And what was the level of interoperability achieved? Thank you.
Yeah. So we clearly made it interoperable in the EDEN project, right? So we basically mapped data to a common data model, which allowed us to operate with the different databases in a federated manner. So it can be made interoperable. Of course, there are situations where it isn't. Like if you want to compare to use a primary care database with a cancer registry, those are different beasts, if you like. But we can make data interoperable, and we have demonstrated that in EDEN and in Darwin and DC.
I would like to ask a question, but I'm sorry if I'm a little bit ignorant about pharma and trials. I would like to ask, the raw data of the clinical trials of the pharmaceutical industries, are there also to share? They are accessible now?
And we will let
May I?
Yeah.
Well, Johnson & Johnson has launched the YODA initiative, where along with the Yale University and other US institutions, there is availability of these raw data of the clinical trials under, of course, their supervision in third parties and based on whatever is the need of this data. If you mean the individual patient to have access, I don't know about, I'm not answering about that. I'm answering about the raw data. So we have a trial, it's a registrational or not a registrational one, and someone else should take benefit of this data. He can go to the specific institution, there is in place this program, and he can have access of the data if the institution decides that it will be of benefit. Not even the company decide based on the agreements that we have in place.
Nadir, what is happening in Sanofi?
We do have since few years, and some other company are doing that. We have a data sharing platform where you can just get there and request to access the data. As Manos has mentioned, there is need for legitimate request for that. You cannot just access the data. I'd like to play with them. So we need to submit the project proposal, why this data is going to be useful for the project proposal. And then it is processed by a committee that will use the rationale. Some external independent parties will also assess that. And when it is being done, then the data can be made available for the researchers. But the answer is yes. Yeah. And growing companies are also adopting the same principle. Yeah, exactly. It's still not address the interoperability questions, because then you get it into the format of the company, not necessarily in the format that can be aggregated with other data, which was my follow-on question, because I think you answered that. So we understand that real-world data is there. I mean, they are more or less some obstacles, but there are ways to address them and utilize them for research purpose. But we also understand that this requires collaboration across multiple functions and skill sets. That's probably my next question is about the skill set. I mean, do we have a sufficient workforce and skilled and trained people to be able to tap into the potential that your data offers? And with that, if you can tell us a few words about what type of real-world data is accessible. I'm talking about structured and unstructured data in particular. Are we talking more about structured data in our environment right now? Or do you see some project where even unstructured data are being used and generate the evidence that we need? Yes, please, Manos, and then.
Yeah, so talking about the skill sets, so this field of real-world evidence has evolved very quickly, and it's become a truly interdisciplinary effort. So you need to have clinicians, pharmacists, allied healthcare professionals. You need engineers, you need biostatisticians, you need computer engineers. So you need all that. It's not easy. I think it's increasingly hard to find these kind of people. In academia, you then have to compete with people who basically pay double what we pay in academia, so it's even harder. But there are people out there, very clever people out there, that I think we need to recruit and find those that have the vocation to do this and get them on board very early in their careers. I have a very successful pipeline of very healthy, experts in all those areas that are progressing in their careers, and hopefully, when I retire in 2 or 3 years' time, they can take over. Your question was about what kind of data. In Darwin, as you saw, we are using data from cancer registries, from nationwide Scandinavian type of registries, drug registries, health claims, primary care records, hospital records, mostly structured, but there's also, depending on the nature of the data at origin, people do the structuring. So they take the free text and structure it and turn it into OMO before they use it for research with us. And I know there's a lot of work going on into, I think there was a very good presentation from Italy, from a colleague from Italy earlier, on how data can be nowadays also, restructured or put in the right structure using large language models and the like, right? So I think we're going to see a lot of effort in that space because now there are tools that allow that.
So Manos, in Greece, how that?
Yes, and just to add to what you mentioned, Danny, a mid-sized local operating company, farm operating company, now in Greece does not have the capacity to have the full extended expertise around it. Okay, you can have one or two people in the best case, but this is also connected with the potential of what you will manage to get your hands on or create from scratch.
Manos, let me understand. You're referring to what happens within a company, so a local affiliate in the Middle East.
Yes, a local affiliate, because we also have a lot of expertise in EMEA level or in global level, but for them also to be mobilized and deal with whatever proposal we have in local level, they must be confident. They must take care of the data because their time is split between 56 countries, and this should create a great potential for them to deal with. So if you want to deal with the current situation in Greece, this is a hurdle. So what we have done, practically speaking, is that we have created primary RWE data, which is a very costly approach, to tell you the truth, and sometimes it just replicates data which are there, but we cannot put our hands on, even indirectly through academia or someone else. But even that, at the current situation, with all the economic hurdles, it's a very expensive investment.
Nadir, time is running against us and we need to vote. So if you can please switch the slide to Slido.
Yeah, so I think you're talking about studies and trials. So I have a questions to the audience here. In your opinion, how many trials are open to recruitment right now as we speak? Let's focus on phase 1 to phase 4 trials, adult only. Globally speaking, how many trials do you believe are open for recruitment? So the audience is wrong. So you believe there are that many trials open for recruitment. Actually, the number open for recruitment right now, phase 1, phase 4, phase 3, it's 19, actually 19,000 studies.
Yeah, but can I ask you a question?
Go ahead, yeah.
Where is your count based on?
This is, the source is trial.gov. So the registry is trial.gov. And we're talking about
And
only...
what is the percentage? What is the estimate about the true number of trials that are registered there today, as opposed, for instance, to 10 or 15 years ago?
Well, I mean, in trial.gov, globally, it's covering probably 80-85% of the global trials that are running. I'm not talking about the real-world data studies because, as we have heard this morning, there is no obligation to report them. I mean, we can find observational studies.
Are you happy with that?
I mean, it's a good result. I don't think we should always look at the perfections. Good enough is what we have to focus on. And we can see full adoptions now, more and more of people running trials to register the trials in trial.gov. So I think it's a good number compared to what we had. I'd like to see the same numbers in other registries. I mean, the WHO registry, the European registry, we have different numbers. It's in the trial.gov is the one that people think about when they move into planning their studies.
Are you concerned by the fact that some trials, or a considerable number of trials from particularly East Asia are not registered, so we don't know what is happening?
It is, I mean, there is a hidden side, of course, into that. And the studies are being run in some other part where even the research activities is new, maybe one decade and a half. If you look at the studies, there is limited studies from Latin America as well, limited studies from Africa, because the researchers there, academic trials in particular, are not forced to do that. They don't, buy into the standards, and they're not educated in that right now.
So can we have the next question, please?
So next question.
Hide results, yes.
So what do you believe is the percentage of studies funded by the industry amongst this trial that we have seen? What do you think is the study funded by the industry? Or I can put the question in the opposite. I mean, from the numbers that I just shown, what is the proportion from those numbers that you would consider to be funded by the industry? Let's take few more votes.
Okay, let's allow 5 more seconds.
So that's a good example of crowd analysis where there is a perceptions of reality that is wrong. Actually, the percentage of studies funded by the industry is 42. So the large number of studies that are being registered is academic or publicly funded studies. And you can see that across multiple analyses. What is telling us? Yes, funded by the industry. That's the definition that is on the, yeah, that's right. But if you look at the way the studies are being registered in trial,
you have both sort of trials. You have the industry as a sponsor, or you have the industry funded IITs.
Yeah, this is not sponsor studies. We're talking about the funding stream. Yeah,
It's the same.
yeah, not exactly. I mean, we can fund investigator funded.
Nadir Heiko has a very strong point, and I agree with him. It's not semantics.
Yeah.
It can be an investigator-initiated study
Correct.
that is
Yeah.
supported by the industry,
Correct.
or a pharma-initiated study. It's
Yeah.
not the same.
Yeah, but here, both are counted into
Okay.
that.
So
Yeah, in 42%.
one by one.
Yeah, I mean, there is a perception that the industry is running the larger number of studies, and this is not correct, actually. Yeah.
But how did you got these information? Because there is opportunity to get the money from the industry without putting the name into the clinical trials.gov.
We have been using here the way that studies are being registered in trial.gov. You need to complete templates to get your study registered. And depending upon what has been recorded into the application, that's where the data is coming from. So if you go back into the way, yeah.
For me, if I'm not mistaken, industry does not have is not mandatory to register the trials that are early phases. And they are the ones that are mostly running early phases. So this is why it might be biased, because they don't appear in clinicaltrials.gov, but they are involved mostly in early phases, but why academia does not run so many early phases.
That's possible. I mean, there is always some bias into the numbers, but I think when you look at the global schema, I mean, when we talk even at the investigator and clinical sites, the publicly funded studies are always higher than the industry funded studies.
And
I think beyond the numbers, what I wanted to share here is the fact that those two, I mean, we still have like the private funded studies and the academic studies running in parallel threads. And I think we have to combine that. We have to move and work more closely and work in the directions where, publicly funded studies or industry funded studies are being run with the same standards, with the same tools and the same, guidelines.
Transparency.
Yeah, and transparency as well.
And
share of practices.
Just to conclude this session, what was the purpose of this question?
That was exactly my comments, is to really look at where we should be working more in converging the directions that we're taking. For data-driven research in particular, we should not be developing industry approach for data-driven research and academic approach for data-driven research. It has to be combined so that the infrastructure that we are going to create and invest could serve best purposes.
Is it happening?
Not yet.
Is it happening?
If it's happening to have this alignment,
yeah.
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't have the full picture. Because
should it happen?
It should happen.
Why?
And at least because it was mentioned the IIS or IIT trials, at least in my company, these trials undergo a very, very thorough review in multiple levels up to the global R&D level. And part of this review is to guarantee that the way that the trial is handled is 100% as if it would be a company-sponsored trial.
So, Christian, no further comment. So, the final word is the speakers.
Yeah.
30 seconds each. Danny, what is your take-home message?
My take-home message, which I think I had before I came, but I have consolidated, is that we should continue to make sure that we make the world of clinical trials, randomized controlled trials, and real-world evidence work together rather than diverge. And and accusing each other of trying to make the other disappear. Because I think we will need both to understand, the efficacy and the safety of a product at the beginning, and then when applied in the community and out of the usual research settings.
Thank you, Danny. Manos.
From my part, I think it's clear that the steps that the EU is taking in order to have access to data is on the right direction. But locally, let's don't just tick the box and apply something because it's an EU regulation, but understand the full potential that this will have, and specifically for the patients.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, I will maybe, if I may have one more word, is also that as we are getting into that space, I think we should look at how can we also work collaboratively so that the data, as they get collected, they are also collected with the purpose to be reusable and become research ready. And one of the players that we don't have on the room is the EHR vendors, the one who are producing, the software that the data are collected.